exercise in zone 2. Zone 2 is roughly somewhere between 60 and 70% of your max heart rate. If you exercise a lot in zone 2, it's the best way to improve your lifespan, improve longevity. And for the life of me, I find no data supporting that. Now, you and I know if you exercise, you'll live longer. I mean, we know that. But once you start getting down into the details, it gets a little tricky. So, Shawn, what do you think of that?
I think that, they're really, I'm not aware of any longitudinal data supporting specifically zone 2 for the longevity part. And I think that just from a purely practical standpoint, you would need to know they're in zone 2, which would suggest that we're talking about very, very long-term studies that would deal in longevity, that heart rate monitors have been around long enough to actually determine that, right? So highly unlikely. Now, that being said, if he's extrapolating that from some of the blue zone data and some of the other longevity studies based on like physical activity patterns and typical activities, then maybe we could make a case for that. But I think the reality is, look, yeah, exercising in zone 2 is good for you. Exercising in zone 3 is good for you. Exercising in zone 4 is good for you too. And so I think sometimes we get caught up a little bit too much in this is the best way to live longer, do this, whatever. I think that in some ways, as silly as this kind of sounds, we need to stop talking about longevity and start talking more about functional longevity. Like, how are you doing? Yeah, you're living longer, but how are you doing? And certainly we know that exercise as well as diet are going to play a pretty big role in that, and I would also argue stress management, one that I need to work on. But I think that when you look at those things, it's hard to just base on, I just don't think there's enough data out there to say that it's specifically zone 2. But that being said, there's enough data on zone 2 to know why that could be the case. I just think it's a pretty firm statement for what we don't really have strong evidence for, other than maybe epidemiological data.
Tony?
Well, just quick question to follow up, Shawn. In terms of, even if we were talking in terms of blue zones, we might be talking in a higher ADL, really, more than anything else. And right, arguably, if you wouldn't have steady state zone 2 in a blue zone from an evolutionary perspective, or even an historical perspective. I mean, gardening or potentially fishing, or those things that keep one active would probably be more of what we're seeing in the everyday lifestyle. But nevertheless, I would happen to agree with you. There are no negatives to the zone 2, from regulating body composition, maybe optimal body weight, along with the cardiovascular benefits and mood benefits. So to your point, and I don't see any negative to it, but to make it conclusive, that would be challenging. Nevertheless, it would be, as I think Shawn best noted, an integral part of potentially increasing lifespan and quality of life.
Yeah, and I think the other thing too to realize is, kind of going back to the blue zone idea, then we have to start questioning the other lifestyle factors that go into the support of being in more zone 2 type activity. And oh, by the way, how long do you need to sustain that? How many hours a day is that? Is it minutes? Is it minutes at a time? Is it a consecutive 20 or 30 minutes? Is it simply that those populations that we see tend to be more active throughout the day, or they ambulate more to get to other places? They use fewer cars, they ride bikes more and things like that. And so now, is there also a covariate in that relates to, as you already mentioned, with like obesity and stuff, the body weight factor too? And so I think it's hard to just parse that out. That being said, I don't want people to think that we don't want to encourage them to exercise in zone 2. Like, it's not bad, but I wouldn't spend your whole time there either, because you're also not going to get the same benefits that some of the higher intensities offer you, or some of the other modalities for that matter.
Which brings me to a question that's more speculative than anything else, because I don't think anyone knows. But let's say, I remember, Shawn, you had posted a recent picture of you, your wife, and there was some other individual who, it was a road race, and your wife got second in her age group.
Oh yeah, it was Katie Hirsch. It was the three of us ran the 5K.
She won.
Yeah.
She won her age group, or she won?
Katie won, and Katie finished second overall, and Michelle took second in her age group.
And you
finished, I did not,
in the top 50%, something like that, right?
I finished in like the top 35%, which was remarkable for somebody who is not a runner. I've recently gotten that way. I'm still hesitant to use that term because I don't know. I mean, when you feel like you're running like Hulk smash, I'm not really sure that I would classify it as a runner, but Michelle insists it doesn't look that bad. So I'm going to go with that.
Okay. So here's the question. If you were training, well, let's take lifestyle, all lifestyle factors. If your goal was to live as long as possible, how would you change your training? How would you change your diet? If you would, like, you're like, I ain't changing shit.
Yeah. I think that, that's a really good question.
And let me stop you there for a second. And the reason I bring that up is people who tend to live long tend to be small.
Yeah. And then I mean, I'm short, but I don't know that I'm small. So that's certainly, there's a difference there. Now, so it's interesting, and you guys know this background story, but for the listeners that don't, I had quadruple bypass last year, right? A little over a year ago. Genetics and stress. They insist, it wasn't so much a lifestyle issue. It wasn't diet and stuff. It was genetics and stress. And sometimes you get the bad hand in that, right? And so you kind of go, okay, well, now I deal with it. And so that whole process, though, really gave me perspective on some things. And I, for the longest time, was I hate cardio. I'm not going to do aerobic exercise, or I would do some, which is funny coming from a former soccer player, but you just get to a point where you're just tired of just running to run. And I will be honest, that whole process really made me appreciate it more, because I was telling Michelle the other day, I've started running a lot more, but it's one of those things where I still don't enjoy running, but you know what I enjoy less than running? Not being able to run. And so the functional aspect of that really spurs me to try to do that. But I would say from a longevity standpoint, I think that if I had to change anything, which I've done, I mean, there's certain things I've modified because I'm like, yeah, I'm kind of not ready to die. I'm 49. Let's kind of figure this out. How long can I be here? Now I think I've got a pretty good life. I've got a phenomenal wife and dog and family. But I think that the biggest thing for me would have been valuing cardiovascular exercise much earlier versus just the weightlifting, the bodybuilding approach, and things like that. But I would say probably for me, the bigger issue, or maybe the one that goes with that, would be stress management. Yeah. I don't think we pay enough attention to that and what it does to sleep, what it does to your recovery from those exercise bouts. So, we were walking one day when, around the neighborhood when I was, trying to get my rehab in. And so we were maybe 6 weeks out from surgery at this point. And I remember walking into the neighborhood and I just looked at her and I was like, you know what? How hard is this for most people? Because I didn't have to massively change my lifestyle. I know what to do for diet. I've got a wife who's incredibly supportive and knows all this as well. I'm like, I had to make like 2 or 3 changes. Right. What do people do? And I sat in the cardiac rehab classes, and the questions they would ask, I'm like, wow, that's like fundamental knowledge to me. Like, I know that stuff. I teach this stuff. And you just realize that we have not done a good enough job collectively of getting the information about the value of activity and more simple nutritional guidance. We get so many of these fad diets that just convolute the hell out of it for people to try to make sense of stuff. And I think at the end of the day, it's, mostly eat whole foods, get cardiovascular exercise and resistance exercise in, strength train, and manage your stress. And oh, by the way, get some sleep. You do those things, and honestly, you're knocking most of the major goals out of the way when it comes to longevity.